Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. Well, with the bowl game on the horizon and the current landscape of college football, we're officially back into off-season mode here at Tech Sideline. Signing day was yesterday. We got the football crew to talk all about it. It's episode 396 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. And we're recording on Thursday, December 5th, 2024, from our high-tech studio right here at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com. Check out our extensive editorial content because subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content. And then for Virginia Tech students, as always, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Today's TSL podcast is also brought to you by The Hokie Way, which has launched their annual year-end Stone by Stone campaign to support Virginia Tech NIL and local nonprofits. This fundraising campaign is critical to the success of Virginia Tech athletics and to local organizations that are doing great work in the community. Visit thehokieway.org to learn more and to donate, and we'll drop the link in the video description down below as well. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way, Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer, and we're keeping it just here on the main set today. David is coming back from being on the road covering basketball, and Will's sitting this one out. We got the mustache man, as always, Nick Brown, producing the show behind the scenes. We'll start out today by talking about yesterday's signing day press conference, and we'll go across the way over to Andy. What stood out to you in the press conference yesterday, Andy? First and foremost, Coach seemed confident in keeping the staff intact. How should we react to that?
I don't know. The question needed to be asked. There's not a great time to ever ask it. You don't want to do it right after the game, the UVA game. They're all celebrating and be like, hey, let me be a downer right here at this point. And then with signing day three days away, they're not going to tell you the truth anyway with all these players about to sign. So sort of at the last question, turning the page on signing day to the next part of the offseason, I asked it. They didn't give an answer that was going to satisfy anybody at Virginia Tech, I think. Left it open-ended the way you can read that. I hope to keep this staff intact. Well, what does that mean? Are people going to poach you? Are you planning changes? I think I get the sense that there's not just going to be a complete teardown of the staff, nor do I think there should be. Necessarily. That's what I keep coming back to is like everybody thinks they have an obvious solution for what needs to happen with the staff. I don't know if there's an obvious solution with this thing. Is I don't think you'd go, oh, the coordinators have to go or one side has to go or the other, because I think they've both been good at times this year and both been at fault in some situations. So it's a long way of saying I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see, but I don't think it's just going to be this massive change that people are expecting.
The offseason will be interesting. I mean, so Brent has 3 regular season records at Virginia Tech, 3-8, 6-6, 6-6. If you could equate his offseason into a football season record, I think he goes 9-3 every year.
That's the thing is like you see, you want to know why Brent Pry's the head coach of Virginia Tech? Watch him on the signing day show.
Yeah.
Right? Like watch him interact with those families. Every one of the moms that are up there, like you can tell, like he knows that the key to recruiting is like being good with the moms on that side of it, because they're going to have a lot of influence over this whole thing. He's personable, he's excitable, he's energetic. You need that in a program to sort of infuse life into it and get these guys to sign on board to, frankly, a product that hasn't been that great in recent years. You're trying to sell something, a vision about the team, and he does a good job with that. And the signing classes, I mean, it ranks fine. You're not going to rank in the top 10 unless you have top 10 NIL money, I would imagine, in this day and age. But they had a fine class. They got to develop those guys over the years like Virginia Tech always does. But you've got to find those guys and sign them. You've got to retain them, which he's pretty good. He showed last year year, the retention that he had with some of these guys that had, options to go to the NFL. You got to develop in the offseason. You can see that there's a good amount of talent on this team, the number of guys that are going to get drafted coming up this year, but you also have to win some games, and it's the on-field stuff and the game management. It's like that part is not there. But I mean, honestly, this is Brent Pry's time to shine, because this is where he's been the best and most effective as a head coach.
Andy, we also got to hear from Fontel Mines and Derek Jones, who obviously play a huge role in recruiting. What did they have to say yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big story yesterday was the Jamari Deloach flip at the last second, getting him from Cincinnati coming to Virginia Tech. So that's sort of where I went with my story, because that was the most interesting and the most current thing that happened with that. And I thought Derek Jones was kind of honest and upfront about the whole process, where he's like, I talked to him on Monday night and I felt like I was saying goodbye to him. And this is a guy that he had recruited for a couple of years. And I think he said it in the signing day show after they got Deloach in the boat, where he's like, you broke my heart, we made up. You broke my heart, we made up. Like, I went to bed Monday night not feeling great. Tuesday I was hopeful. And today I'm very happy that you got signed. So I mean, it just kind of shows you this process and the persistence and chipping away at guys and chipping away. And they got to pay off here at the end, and they got a 4-star defensive back to add to what looks like a pretty good defensive back group. And I think it was a strong close to the class. I'm not going to sit here and hail the class as, some top 10 group or something like that. This will be the one that changes, the direction at Virginia Tech. But it was a solid class to build on some solid classes previously, and that's what you have to do.
That reminds me, this is a slight tangent, but you talk about recruits breaking coaches' hearts during the process and everything. Do you know the story of the Eddie Royal recruitment, about how he committed to Virginia Tech? It was right at the end. Now, Eddie was a top 5 recruit in the state, and his final 3 were Virginia Tech, UVA, and Marshall. If that shows you how much recruiting has changed through the years. Right?
Well, that's coming off the Byron Leftwich years, right?
Yeah,
around then.
And his brother played for Marshall, so that was part of it. But he was being recruited, I think it was by Lorenzo Ward at Virginia Tech, and I think the day he was going to make his announcement, it might have been signing day itself, he called up Ward and said, "Coach, I'm going to Marshall." And Ward throws his phone across the room, just slams it down, so angry. How did I lose Eddie Royal to Marshall? And then Eddie Royal calls back and said, "I was just kidding. I'm coming to Tech." So
it's like, that's great. Never do that again.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, now, I mean, you can't even I don't know if he was on the phone when he threw it like that, or if he do it afterwards. Now you just have to sort of smile and be like, we wish you luck, good luck there. And, keep us in mind.
Right.
Because you never know 1, 2, 3 years down the line if you're going to get one of those rebound recruits. So you got to keep those relationships there. I know before was the Charlie Wiles phone call where the reporter was transcribing. Is like, "I've never felt so betrayed, and you can hang with your homeboys here and all this stuff." It's like, you can't do that now if you want to get those guys a couple years down the line and work those relationships. So it's just sort of an interesting dynamic with the give and take with recruits and recruiters.
Even crazier nowadays, there's situations where guys leave one school. Maybe they go to quote unquote greener pastures, and the grass is not always greener. Then they go back to their old school. Deuce Chestnut at Syracuse left for LSU, went there for a year or two, and then came back to Syracuse and was again another star, a second time at Syracuse. Well, the Hokies signed the number 7 class in the ACC. It ranks 40th nationally, according to 247 Sports. What did it feel like the focus was in this year's class? Was there a certain type of athlete they were looking for? Were they looking to gain a little bit of size in comparison to years past? 12 in-state guys, that's always a big emphasis.
That's always a big emphasis. A lot of DBs in this class, particularly with the number they were trying to sign at the end or trying to flip. They obviously flipped Deloach. They got a commitment from Jordan Krim, another cornerback, the night before signing day, and they were actively trying to flip Aiden West from Michigan State as well, but he decided on signing day yesterday to stay true to his original
Did you
commitment.
watch his thing?
I watched.
He had a big puffy jacket on.
Right.
And then he didn't use that to you can't wear a big puffy jacket to your signing day thing and then not use it. It's like Chekhov's gun here. Like, if you introduce this in the first act, you have to fire it in the third act. Come on, man. That's signing day 101. You got to have a big thing. He just pulled out a hat and put it on.
No drama at all.
It's like, maybe what do you have a big jacket on for if you're not going to reveal a T-shirt or something like that?
Maybe it was just cold in there. I don't know. Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this this whole Jamar Deloach thing, 4-star flip from Cincinnati. Do we know anything about that? Like how they were able to get him to flip so late?
I mean, he was one of those guys. If you go back to the spring, and all the crystal balls on 247 had him going to Michigan. As it turned out, I think when Michigan's staff changed over, I don't think he had a committable offer to Michigan anymore. There are questions about his size. He's listed at 170 now. He was listed at 160 back then. Like he's not a big guy. And so he ended up, I guess he figured out he couldn't go to Michigan. He just kind of randomly seemed like committed to Cincinnati. And I'm sure he had his reasons and everything like that, but I don't think anybody saw that coming. And I think the Virginia Tech coaching staff was basically like, okay, you're committed to Cincinnati, but that's the wrong decision, so we're going to keep recruiting you. We understand your reasonings, but we think it's the wrong reason, so we're going to keep recruiting you. And,
not only they keep recruiting him, he stayed on like the coaches' calls every week, the recruiting calls. So like he sort of kept contact, and I think that kept that door open.
It definitely did. So he was always open. He was one of those guys who was committed, but if you're like a Cincinnati coach, you're like, no, I don't consider him committed.
He was their highest ranked commitment, I think. So,
I think
and in this day and age, we talk like how'd they flip him? It's like maybe money played a factor.
Who knows?
Like it's legal now to do that. So I'm not like saying something illicit about this thing, but it's the truth in all this stuff. It's like, oh, how did Michigan flip this guy from LSU? It's like, well, they offered him a buttload of money. That's how they did it.
Yeah.
So that plays a factor.
It could potentially play a factor. You never know. With NIL numbers not being published, you never know. But what we do know is that he was at or near the top of Virginia Tech's board as a defensive back from the very beginning, and they continued to recruit him until the very end.
You got 11 early enrollees. How huge can that be for this team? One of them is Micah Matthews, who's going to be playing baseball.
Yeah,
so roughly
that
10.
One kind of doesn't count. Even Tech does a good job of getting guys in early these days. Even with that last year, because the Hokies brought back so many juniors and seniors, you just didn't see very many true freshmen getting on the field this year. And that was the case. It was only Quentin Reddish. I think he ended up being the only true freshman who did not redshirt this past season, which I think is fantastic. But you're losing a bunch of guys this year, and depending on how they're replaced in the transfer portal, I would find it hard to believe that only one true freshman plays next year. I don't know how many it will be or what positions it will be. That's dependent on how the Hokies reload in the transfer portal at certain spots. But like a guy like Jaden Anderson, I think is a guy who could play, but that depends on what they do at wide receiver in the portal. I'm a big fan of Sheldon Robinson, and he could be used at safety or star. He plays just as much star, or maybe more, in high school than he does safety. And when I look at that star spot, I see Keonta Jenkins is gone, and I see Gabe Williams. Looks like he broke his leg in the last game and got taken off the field in an ambulance. I'd find it hard to believe that he'll be ready to roll for the start of next season. So I think Sheldon Robinson is a guy who could potentially factor in early at either a safety spot because they need depth there, or the star position. But some of that, again, it depends on the portal. But yes, getting those guys in early increases their chances of playing early. I think
it's probably Kelly Lawson, Spencer at star.
If they want to move.
Lawson's looked good there playing there so far. I think the early enrollee thing's interesting because whenever a freshman plays early, like, well, he got here early and those reps were real important. It's like some of the best guys that Tech has had that have played early like that didn't arrive early.
Right.
Like Monsieur Delane got here in the summer, and then he was just that good. He just played right away. Isaiah Ford and Cam Phillips stepped on campus in the summer, and they were basically starters right away. So it's not necessary to do it. Would you like to have those guys more prepared? But I think if any of those guys enrolled early, they would have been more prepared for their freshman year. But you can arrive in the summer and just be good enough and be ready to play right away. It would help to have to go through those practices and be in a college weight room and understand the system a little bit better. All that would help your maturity and preparation for the game, but it's not required, I think, to get on the field.
He's exactly right. No, I like it from a strength and conditioning standpoint. I like it. It's like an extra offseason in the strength and conditioning program, and then you can still redshirt, right? Sure. So Tech brought in, God, how many of those guys from last year's class were here were here last winter and last spring and still redshirted? Probably like 10, something like that. Maybe 8 or 10, something around that number. like Derek Dandy, who's a defensive end from North Carolina. He really changed his body last spring and then still redshirted. So I think that's very beneficial. You don't gray shirt guys anymore. Like the Hokies used to like send guys to prep school or gray shirt them and then red shirt them. And basically they'd have like 6th-year seniors later in their careers. And you can't really do stuff like that anymore. But getting them in early is kind of the next best thing these days.
You got 19 total signees yesterday for Virginia Tech. There are some schools out there that are up in the 30s. Does this feel like it's a little bit on the smaller side, or is this just right?
This is the first time since the 94 and 95 recruiting classes that Virginia Tech has signed fewer than 20 players in back-to-back classes. Now, if they sign anybody else in February, whether a high school player or a JUCO, that will make that point moot. But yeah, it's smaller classes. When I looked yesterday, 21 of the top 25 classes did sign 20-plus players. But the number of players signed these days goes into the recruiting ranking. So Virginia Tech's 7th in the ACC, but I think if you look at it in an average star ranking, they're like 5th. So some of it is dependent on the number of players that you sign. But yes, with the transfer portal, it's not surprising to see slightly smaller classes these days, and that's probably a trend that could continue.
And you get the additional pieces. You don't really know what the scholarship limit's going to be.
Right.
Like where are they going to cap it? Where are they going to say how many are you going to allowed to go to, just in terms of how much money you have to pay these guys. So you're not really working with that hard 85 like you were before. So maybe a little surprised it's this small, but I do expect a large transfer class because you don't want to just sign like, oh, we got 40 freshmen coming in this class. It's like, all right, but then you have 40 freshmen in the class. Like it throws the balance out in your different classes, and a bunch of those guys are going to leave anyway because they're not getting playing time as they come up through the ranks. So I think there's sort of a max of what you can get on these, and it's probably somewhere from 18 to 25 is probably about the right number with this. Once you start going over that, then it's like you're just taking chances. When you're signing your 27th, 28th guy, you're really throwing some lottery tickets out there.
There was one school that signed 30-some players, which I thought was shocking for this day and age. Old Dominion signed, I think, 28, but get this. They didn't sign anybody from the 757 is what I read. How does Old Dominion sign a class of 28 and not sign a single player from the Tidewater?
That's weird. You know that team that's signed 34? Syracuse.
Yep.
1 4-star, 32 3-stars.
Yep.
And they ranked ahead of Virginia Tech in the rankings.
Yeah.
It tells you volume that it helps in the rankings
Hey,
sometimes.
The point because my dad was talking to me about that yesterday. He's like, well, some of their best players that have gone to the NFL are like 2 stars, whatnot, like Zaire Franklin and stuff. And he's like, I think you got a better chance of striking gold the more guys you got. I'm like, that's a law of averages. All right,
as you can see, every fan base rationalizes what they sign to what they sign. We don't get stars, we develop stars. And the ones that can get the stars, like we just go for big stars because you got to recruit like a blue blood to win championships. Like the narrative changes where you are on the scale, and you don't really change on the scale where you are. I mean, that's the thing about recruiting is you kind of are what you are in recruiting. Like regardless of who comes in there, like you could bring Nick Saban in here and maybe they would do a little bit better, but there's still a ceiling you're gonna hit in terms of resources that are allowed to go after recruiting, money that you have to go after recruiting now too. So it's just funny to me to hear that and go, well, I think I've heard that rationalization from other fan bases before.
Sure. Last thing I wanted to ask you guys before we get into some more specifics of how was the signing day experience? You both were there. They kind of make a spectacle out of it. How does that help enhance in recruiting?
I mean, it's entertaining to watch. It used to be the name came in and they just like announce it. It just like tweeted out or something like that. And, even before Twitter, there wasn't any fanfare with these things. They're turning this into like a whole like event. And this is a James Franklin thing that they did before. And, they've done it 3 times now here at Virginia Tech. It's a nice way to like celebrate the new players coming into your program, make them feel special, and the families are on the Zoom, and it's this whole big thing where the coaches are all there in lockstep and introducing them and cheering them on and stuff like that. And I guess it's a nice like final introduction before they get here. It's like, okay, run laps. Like we're going to put you through hell now that you're here and turn you into a good football player. You build them all up and then break them down and start over. Maybe not as much now with the transfer portal. They could leave if they don't like it, but it's a nice celebration. It's good for like the recruiting staff. Like you think of all the hours and phone calls and sleepless nights that these people have put in there and trying to bring this class in. I think it's good to have them allow them to sort of have that release and that celebration, and put it up on camera for everybody to see.
I think Brent Pry's may be the most positive person I've ever been around.
He's real positive. Yeah,
he really is, and it seems genuine. If it's fake, then he should go to Hollywood and start a new career as an actor, because it really seems sincere. So I think that's Pry in his element. That's the absolute best of Brent Pry, and that's why everybody loves him in the offseason. Now, what you have to be careful of, it's imperative that Virginia Tech start winning games next year. I don't mean winning 6 games. I mean start finishing with winning records, and make it seem like the program is heading in the right direction at the end of November next year. Because if you keep going 6-6, or even worse, if you take a step back with losing so many players, then this signing day press conference will start to ring hollow to a certain extent. The positivity won't seem... Well, the fans won't buy into it as much anymore.
It'll be a disconnect from like the results you're seeing versus what they're trying to sell you.
Exactly. And some fans will even start to make fun of it.
They already have.
They already have, right.
It's already started there, yeah.
Sure. So I think it's great and all that. And, we need to be happy at some point during the calendar year about football. Not
allowed. Not allowed.
We've got to start winning football games at some point, or what they do in December will ring hollow.
Very true. Very true. All right, let's talk about the offensive side of this class and get into the nuts and bolts here a little bit more. 8 total players on the offensive side. Let's start with the quarterbacks, A.J. Brand, Keldon Ryan. What do we like about these two?
Well, Keldon Ryan's interesting. Virginia Tech took his commitment after his sophomore year of high school, and at that point, he had thrown more interceptions than touchdowns. Now, you could look at his film and watch him throwing in some workouts, and you could see some real talent there, but you didn't know if he would develop as a passer. So that's a risk that sometimes you have to take. And as it turns out, he really did develop. He had a great junior year and then an even better senior year. I think he completed 73% of his passes this year.
And he transferred high schools, too.
He did, to a more high-profile passing team. He also improved from 6.1 yards per carry to 9.1 yards per carry from a junior to a senior, which is kind of an indicator that either he was better at reading defenses on the read option, or he got a little bigger, a little stronger, and increased his athleticism. I think he's a little bit more advanced than A.J. Brand, because he's a 4-year starter in Texas where football's really advanced. And, Brent Pry talked yesterday about going to see him play in a game where there were 30 future Division I players playing in that game. I mean, so he faces top-notch talent every week. And, A.J. Brand, there's good players in South Carolina, but there's just not waves of them like in Texas. So Brand was only a 2-year starter in high school and didn't play against as many good players. So I think he's a little bit behind mechanically. He's a little bit behind from an experience standpoint and how he sees the field. If you look at a lot of his highlights, they're all like, he doesn't stay in the pocket. He always rolls to his right and completes a big play. Like, never rolls to his left, rarely stays in the pocket. It's like, roll right, throw the ball down the field, or run it. You can do that against, South Carolina players. You're not going to be able to do that in college. But I do think he's a little bit more of an explosive athlete with a good arm. And obviously, his dad was a Halifax County Hall of Famer in the state of Virginia, and went on to have a very, very good career, I believe, at the Division III level as a quarterback. So I think he was well brought up by his dad. He understands the ins and outs of player development and the patience you have to have. I think he's a high ceiling guy. I'm very happy to sign both those guys. I didn't realize Tech was going to sign 2 quarterbacks in this class after they ended up with Keldon Ryan, but I think when they discovered Brand, they were like, if we got a chance to sign this guy, let's go ahead and get him.
It sounded like Brand had some suitors down the stretch there.
Shane.
I think South Carolina was pushing hard to get him, and I think it gave the staff great joy to fend off Shane in that recruitment. A little surprised that they got both in. It seems like now you get your quarterback, and then the other quarterbacks go somewhere else. So replenishing the ranks in that room. We'll see how the pop drones thing, how that all plays out here going forward. But, you need guys there, because you can see how quickly you can get whittled down to, 2 or 3, or maybe sometimes less than that if you're in real trouble. And then you have to go back into the portal and find some more guys. So they signed 2 a couple years ago with Pop Watson and Dylan Whitkey in the same class. That resolved itself. Whitkey transferred, Pop elevated a little bit, and he became the guy that is perhaps pushing for a starting job now. I think we'll see the same thing with this. I think it'll naturally work itself out eventually, but you like to have those options and have those guys competing in the program and see where it goes.
I think the biggest thing that stood out to me about Keldon Ryan specifically was typically when you see these classes, a lot of these guys look like high schoolers, especially body-wise, because they are high schoolers, right? And he looks like a college football player already, which I think is something that is to be on the lookout for, no doubt. And
Texas
and
to VT.
Yeah.
Texas to VT. It lives.
There we go.
It will never die.
There we go.
That's the one guy out of their historical recruiting footprint that they did. And that's, you do that for a quarterback.
Right.
It makes sense.
And Chris, you brought up that point when you were talking about Keldon Ryan in those little clips you did with Carter that you can't just recruit the state of Virginia when it comes to quarterbacks. That's a national search.
Yeah, I mean, if you recruited the state of Virginia for quarterbacks, there's been like one Power 5 starter over the last 15 or 20 years from the state of Virginia.
That's crazy.
You see, you can't depend on the state of Virginia anymore for quarterbacks. It used to be all of Tech's quarterbacks almost came from the state of Virginia, but that's not, can't go to that well anymore.
That was one thing when I talked to Fuente about recruiting here, and when he took the job, he's like, man, I just thought every year there'd be some 6'4" dual threat guy from the 757 that you pull out of there every single year. And that just wasn't the case. And you look at their history of recruiting quarterbacks, and they had to go, Hendon Hooker out of North Carolina, Gerard Evans out of Texas. I mean, they had to go all over the place to get these guys. So that's just the nature of the game.
How about the wide receivers in this class? Headlined by 4-star Shamarius Snook, as everyone calls him, Peterkin. You also have some question marks here because you don't know what Luke Stewie's going to do, if he's going to play offense or defense. He's listed as an athlete. And then Micah Matthews is looking to lean towards the baseball side, but could be a good athlete for the wide receiver room.
I consider Micah Matthews a primarily baseball player right now because he's going to enroll next month and immediately be on the baseball team. He's not going to be in spring football practice. How that first baseball season goes will kind of determine, I think, the rest of his career. Like if he somehow breaks into the starting lineup in baseball as a freshman in the ACC, and he was already projected to be drafted out of high school, and he chose to go to college instead, so he'll have to play in college for 2 or 3 years, but if he has a good freshman season in baseball and, the MLB draft looks like it's still a legit possibility, then you don't want to be messing around and getting a football injury and wrecking your future baseball signing bonus. So
hey, Jeff Samardzija did it at Notre Dame.
He did.
Pretty good receiver, and then he went to the baseball route as a reliever.
Went to the Cubs, right?
Yeah.
Play for the
I
Cubs,
mean, there's a lot of Jameis Winston did both. Russell Wilson did both. Kyler Murray did both.
I think with those guys,
it
was kind of clear that football was their primary thing. Though. I mean, I guess Kyler was like the 8th pick or something like that by the A's, which was a weird pick in hindsight.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we can learn too much from past situations like this. It's kind of a rare thing.
Sure.
At least for Virginia Tech.
I'm considering Matthews like a bonus for the football class. If it becomes a really good football player here, that's great. Sure. If not, then John Sheff gets a good base.
Crazy that he's a 4-star in football too, though.
Yeah, he's got great size. He was listed at 205, but when you actually look at him, he looks bigger than that. He's really physically developed. If he wasn't playing baseball, he would be a guy I think could contribute early. Peterkin is a very dynamic receiver, and again, everybody thought he was going to NC State out of Winston-Salem. But Mike Young told him he could have a chance to play basketball. So we'll see how that works out. Now, unlike Matthews, he's going to be football first.
Right.
So, we'll see what happens. If he gets on the field as a true freshman for football next year, and he's 6'2", 172, he's going to need that offseason in the weight room to add size. And you can't add size if you're out there running up and down a basketball court all the time. So
how many guys in the history of football recruiting have been told, like, we'll give you a shot at basketball?
Absolutely, yeah.
Like Isaiah Ford. Isaiah Ford was one I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank Beamer at the time was like, he's the one that could have done it.
Right.
He's like one of the few guys he thinks that could have done it. But like, you talk to these football players, they all think they're like superstars in hoops. Like you get them in a pickup game, like, I'm going to put up 30, 35 in this thing. So I feel like sometimes the mindset is there and maybe the skill set is not as good as that. So we'll see with this. Generally, I think if you're signing for football and then and you get to give basketball a shot, like that's a hobby at that point.
And Brian Randall and Jeff King did it back in the day, but they didn't start playing basketball until like their 3rd or 4th year at Virginia Tech. They were already physically developed. They were already experienced football players, so they didn't need spring practice. They couldn't have done it early in their careers, and even then, they were just role players. They didn't get on the court very much. I think Luke Stewie is a guy. His position is kind of dependent on everybody else. I think kind of if you look towards the end, Virginia Tech brought in some more defensive backs. Then maybe that pushes him more towards wide receiver, especially if Micah Matthews ends up being a permanent baseball player. That might push Stewie a little bit towards wide receiver, but he's got really good ball skills. You can see it on film, whether he's playing wide receiver or safety. And I'd heard like his camp, I don't think it was this past summer. I think it was the summer before. I heard he had an awesome camp at Tech. And that's when they first offered him. And you saw a couple of Tech coaches allude to that yesterday about his impressive camp performance. His dad, I know his dad, Michael Stewie, was a good wide receiver here.
Was he a scholarship guy or walk-on?
He came in as a walk-on.
Okay. He was like there were like 4 walk-ons that were like starters back in those days.
Yeah. He had a good career for the Hokies, especially in '96. I believe he caught 5 touchdown passes.
I wonder what took him out to Ohio. Right? Isn't that where Luke Stewie's from?
Well, that's where Mike's from originally.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And let's see, Jaden Anderson is a guy who I really like in the slot. I don't know his numbers from his senior year, but I know his junior year at Green Run, he caught 48 passes for like 1,200 yards. And remember, he was sharing catches with Keelan Adams, who's the all-time leading receiver in Virginia history.
Right.
And also Knowledge Harrell, who's a cornerback, was also playing wide receiver on that team and catching some passes. So I think that says quite a bit about Anderson, that he can be that productive while sharing catches with someone like Keelan Adams. I think Anderson is explosive. He'll play in the slot, and I think he can factor in the run game like Jalen Lane, and also as a punt returner.
How great of a program has Green Run been?
Apparently they're
produce
really
all
good
these
right
guys
now.
in back-to-back years like this. That's a pretty good run.
Yep.
Yeah, making all the graphics, I noticed that. I was like, this is the only high school that I remember from
3 guys from Green Run. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. Now, I don't know this for sure. I haven't talked to you yet about it, Chris, but I'm excited to hear your thoughts. I got to think you love a guy like Jeff Overton, 4-star running back. What does he bring to the table?
It's kind of hard to tell.
Okay.
So at one point this season, he had 80 carries for 1,400 yards, which sounds great. The high school he plays for, Hayfield, obviously they're not allowed to participate in the playoffs this year. And I don't want to get into that. That doesn't have anything to do with my views on Overton. But against VHSL competition during the regular season, they allowed 13 points. And their average wins were like by 60 and 70 points a game. So it's a high school all-star team playing against a bunch of regular kids.
What class are they?
6.
Yeah, they're the top level.
Top, okay.
Right. Their one game they did not play against a VHSL team. They went to play one of those private schools in Maryland and lost 55-30. So that tells you like the talent level edge they had over all those Nova teams they were playing. So it's really hard to judge a guy when he's playing against guys that can't hit back. It's kind of like watching a boxer against an amateur boxer, right? It'd be like watching Mike Tyson against his sparring partner in a real boxing match or something.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Jake Paul, who's not a real boxer.
So I think he's good, and Dwight Vick loves him. And I'll
pretty good track record on those recommendations.
Exactly. And I'll always trust Dwight's opinion on a player. So I'm very good with it. It was just, he was going to be a guy that was going to be hard for me to evaluate because of that. But once I saw Dwight go all in on him, I'm good with it. So yeah, I did, and his film is impressive, but again, you have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I think you look at Overton's skill set and you go, he's going to run some MFers over, as his dad said on the signing day cast. It's like, oh, sorry for the language, I get excited. That's what he was saying afterwards. But,
that was after the media had left.
Yeah, we were watching on the live stream. So I mean, I think the interesting thing, Pry and the staff are obviously excited about his skill set. Pry also said he thinks he's one that can help as a freshman. So I think that tells you that they might have plans in mind for him in that running back room. I still think they go after a portal candidate because obviously Bayshall leaving. I don't know what the deal will be with Malachi Thomas, but he hasn't necessarily been a number 1 guy in the past. So I think they're going to try to go out and find somebody in the portal like that. But if they're already talking about him possibly helping as a freshman, I think they have him in their plans.
Please, Damon Claiborne hit the portal. That's what I've been thinking. But
Where's he from?
Oh, he's the Wake Forest running back.
Where's he from originally? He's from
Virginia.
All right.
Okay.
All right. That was my kind of follow-up question here. Were you surprised that he is the only running back in the freshman class? Obviously, you see Tootin going out. Feels like that room is getting a little thin. We talked about they're going to need one, maybe even two guys out of the portal at running back. Were you surprised there's not more in the freshman class?
Not really, because I think they wanted to hold a spot for a portal guy or maybe two, depending on who's out there and who you can get.
There we go. No tight ends. Did that surprise you at all?
Tech offered a few tight ends, but they never seemed to really be serious. I'm not even sure if any tight ends took official visits this year. It's the youth, they had 2 redshirt sophomores and a redshirt freshman. Those were their scholarship tight ends this year. So those guys are going to be here for a while. At least in theory, they're going to be here for a while. I wouldn't shock me if maybe they tried to go out there and maybe if they can find a younger portal guy with multiple years of eligibility left, maybe sign one. But yeah, you would normally like to have, I would say, 4 scholarship tight ends on your roster.
Yeah, I mean, they lose Gallo, but they lost him already this year, so it's not like it's going to be a different depth chart than what they had this year. I think they like, was it Jurikis? How do you pronounce it?
Jurikis Harrison.
I think they like him as a walk-on developing there. So maybe that's a portal thing you look at possibly, but I think there are greater needs than that right now.
Yeah.
Last one on the offense. Thoughts on the offensive line addition?
Yeah, look, I'm fine with the 2 guys Tech signed. Carter Stallard is just a big, wide body and a good athlete. 6'8", 310, or 320 or 330, depending on how you look. He'll play at 330, if not more.
This is how Pry described. He said this. He gave this anecdote a couple times, and he's like, they were doing his recruiting visit on the pontoon boats out on the lake, and he saw him jump off a pontoon boat onto this other
on a raft,
onto a raft, and he landed it. On all fours, landed it, and then they were trying to shake him off, and they couldn't shake him off. And they're like, man, he's big and athletic and has balance for a 6'8", 330. He kept saying 6'8", 330, so he's going to err on the large side, of course, of the weight here. But I think it kind of gives you a sense of his athleticism. He was really hammering home that story yesterday.
You see him next to Sergio Render. I've seen him next to Sergio in a couple pictures, and Sergio is a former starting lineman for Tech and a very, very good one, and Stallard just dwarfs him, So
it's a legit 6'8".
Yeah, he's legitimately huge, and I like Nathaniel Wright as well. My only issue with offensive line recruiting is you only signed 2 guys this year. You only signed 3 guys last year. Portal offensive linemen, even completely mediocre offensive linemen that go into the portal, are getting a decent amount of money these days. So I think you need your best bet.
I think they wanted more.
Yes.
There were a couple of targets late. There's a guy in Georgia. How do you pronounce his name?
I forget.
Began with an O, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he was at Georgia State, and then Georgia comes in late. It's
right.
What do you do now? Come on. The guy's 45 minutes from Athens. Of course he's going to go to Georgia there. And there was another one that they were targeting that they couldn't get. So I think they wanted to sign more than the 2. I think they're happy with the 2. Would have liked more, but sometimes, you're on a guy that's at Georgia State. You think you're going to flip him, and then Georgia, speeds in at the last second. And it's like, okay.
Tech wanted to get bigger. Tech wants to get bigger on the offensive line, and good. You could tell that. You could tell that by all the players they offered. They offered some massive dudes this summer, 12 to 15, big wide body guys. They didn't get as many as they wanted, so they struck out on a whole lot of them. So this is my one issue with this class, is they didn't do good enough on the offensive line. Not with the 2 they got, but they didn't sign enough. And considering they only signed 3 last year, that's 5 linemen over two classes, and you would seem even that's just not enough. That's not enough, especially with offensive line recruiting being such a crapshoot and how expensive linemen are in the portal. The 2 portal linemen Tech has signed haven't done anything either, so it's even a crapshoot recruiting the portal. You're much better off being able to develop offensive linemen yourself, homegrown. And now that you can have more than 85 players on scholarship, I think Virginia Tech would be well served to sign more offensive linemen, even if you just sign 1 or 2 more guys a year. It just puts you in a better position to have better depth and better overall talent up there. And so I think they need to rethink maybe on their offensive line recruiting strategy. I think maybe they need to study some smaller schools. I put it in my article yesterday, the number of offensive linemen that got drafted from smaller schools last year, and there were a ton of them. There were a couple of schools in there that I'd never heard of. Findlay University, wherever that is, apparently in Ohio somewhere. British Columbia University, Like there was an offensive tackle drafted from there, from who went to college in Canada. I mean, there are a lot of good offensive linemen from smaller schools that get drafted, and so I realize it's very difficult to recruit offensive linemen. Maybe you need to start taking a look at some of those smaller programs that generally produce good offensive linemen and start trying to poach a little bit. Like if the guy's committed to him, go in with an offer. I mean, I think all offensive line recruiting is a risk to begin with. So, but now that you have room on your roster, then I think it's worth just adding some more guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a crapshoot with O-line. I mean, just look at Virginia Tech's history of guys that are now in the NFL. Wyatt Teller obviously was a prize recruit, but nobody wanted Darisaw coming out of high school. He goes to Fork Union. Yash Nijman was a project, went to Fork Union as well.
Came in as a defensive tackle.
Yeah, I mean, Brock Hoffman was at Coastal Carolina, 2-star guy, I think, and then comes up here after that. So, I mean, it really is such a developmental position that the blue chip guys, like, sure, maybe they'll pan out, but you see a lot of those unheralded guys that work at it over the years and aren't just simply bigger than their competition in high school. I think a lot of the like, oh, this guy's a blue chip guy. It's like, is he, or is he just massive and everybody else in high school is not that big? So you get to college and everybody's big and fast, then it becomes a different kind of game. So I think that's where you kind of separate where the truly great offensive linemen are. And sometimes those guys develop and come out of nowhere.
Like Pete Thamel says, you cannot microwave a good offensive line. Can't happen overnight. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. First Bank and Trust Company offers a variety of checkings and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs. That includes free checking, so visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. I'll never be able to read that ad read without smirking.
Get to change up the language.
We got to switch it up, no doubt. Anyways, we got great Christmas gift ideas for you, and one in particular that's super special. So we're going to pause the show real quick. Go ahead and take a look at this.
Hey, Hokie fans, Christmas is right around the corner, and we've got a great gift idea for any Hokies wish list. Own a piece of Hokie football history. This limited edition offering is an acrylic pyramid that contains a piece of the north end zone goalposts from Virginia Tech's 1999 season-ending 38-14 win over Boston College that sealed an undefeated season and a trip to the national championship game. Each pyramid is about 4 inches high and comes in a unique 3-piece box and includes a numbered certificate of authenticity, making your purchase a true limited edition collector's item. Once they're gone, so order yours today. We'll drop a link in the video description for you to learn more and to order your piece of Hokie football history.
And welcome back once again, episode 396 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Andy and Chris on the set. Let's talk about these defensive signees. You got 10 players signed on the defensive side of the football. If Stewie were to stay on defense, where do we see him fitting on the defensive side, Chris?
Probably free safety, if I had to guess. I would guess Sheldon Robinson would probably be on strong safety, although I don't know that for a fact. But I would guess probably a free safety for Luke if he does play defense. All
right. Wanted to ask you guys your thoughts on the defensive backs room. You got Deloach, which obviously is a big hitter there. He's the headliner. You also have Sheldon Robinson, Harrell's in there, Jordan Krim. You touched on this previously, Chris, but maybe a little bit more in depth this time on the defensive backs.
Yeah, a little more in depth. All right, Deloach, they say, could play safety or corner, but like
or nickel.
Or nickel.
They like him as a nickel,
I could see nickel or corner, but at 170 pounds, I don't see safety personally. That's just me. Knowledge Harrell's a guy they identified very early and from Green Run. I like Knowledge
A+
Harrell.
name. Like,
A+.
You know, when we go over the opposing things, like, oh, that's a good name.
That's a
like,
great
they're
name.
going to look at Virginia Tech and go, Knowledge. That's awesome.
How do you pronounce that? Knowledge. Oh, wow. And he went up against great competition every day because he was going up against Keelan Anderson and Jaden Anderson in practice every day. And so I think he's a good prospect. And apparently he's a guy who didn't really like the recruitment process all that much, kind of like Shamari Connor. So it's like he didn't even really talk to the coaches. He was committed and then just doesn't talk to them. You know, so, but just hated recruiting. Real quiet guy, does his talking on the field. So hopefully he's very much like Shamari Connor on the field. Also, let's see, where else am I looking at defensive backs? I think those were Krim was a guy apparently had been committed for a few months. Took all his visits in the summer. Also visited Georgia Tech and Duke, and then finally announced his commitment. They really like him. is my understanding. You know, he's not the biggest guy. He's kind of built like Dorian Strong. He's got some length to him. He can fill out some more. You don't necessarily see him coming in as a true freshman and playing like Dorian Strong did at that age. But I think the long-term view is he can be a Dorian Strong type player. Sheldon Robinson, again, is a guy who I think could play star or safety. Kind of depend. Like I agree with Andy. I would move Kelly Lawson to star. I think that's his best position by far in the Virginia Tech defense. I wouldn't waste any more time playing him between the tackles. I would make that move, you know, for the bowl game and just practice it this month. And then you've got a better idea heading in the spring if that move could work. That's kind of one of the things you could use the bowl game practices for. So if Lawson does move to star, then you could obviously start Sheldon Robinson off at safety. I think he's a good prospect either way. He's one of the guys, like I'll do my half star rating system in February once you watch all the senior film and to see if they sign anybody else in February. But he's a guy I'm considering for a four-star status. I think for the position he plays, he's got excellent acceleration, excellent speed for his position. And I really like the way he manipulates blockers and understands outside leverage. That's why I really like to see the guy play the star position. But whatever, I'm happy to have him in the program. I think he's a guy that probably doesn't get talked about enough. Woodbury Forest, too. That's a private school in Northern Virginia. Hardly ever send any players to Virginia Tech. Tech will recruit them, and they'll end up at, like, UVA or UNC or somewhere like that. But I'm very glad to get this one because I think he's an excellent prospect.
I like that Jordan Kramer is going by JoJo.
Yeah.
It's on the thing. So they have JoJo, Knowledge, and Jamari as the primary cornerbacks they signed in this group. And then a Snook on offense. So some great names in this class.
And Knowledge, of course. Yeah, you're right. Maybe we should have like a whole podcast. What are the best named classes in Virginia Tech?
That's a summer project right there.
Yeah. Divine Diablo will always be the GOAT, I think. That's going to be tough to top.
Yeah, no doubt. How about these linebackers? You talk about guys maybe being able to play a different position. I know you feel like Brennan Johnson's a guy that could maybe play safety. You also got Brett Clatterbaugh and Noah Chambers in the linebacking group.
I think they're going to start Brennan Johnson off at star. I think he's a guy... Like, he was starting at Mike linebacker for Highland Springs as a freshman and played great, and also played great as a sophomore. I mean, this is a guy who I believe has been Defensive Player of the Year in the state of Virginia. Arguably the best natural football player in the class, but he kind of stopped growing. And he looked like he was going to be, up 220 pounds at this point, but he's not. He's still around 190, apparently. I think he's an excellent natural football player, though, and they were right to sign him in this class, even though his growth didn't quite fit with what they originally projected. He started working out at safety in camps and things like that, and he's got some experience at the position now. Could play strong safety, could play star. I think they'll probably start him off at star, in my view, but he's the type of player that, like, the program was built on in the 1990s, like a guy who might not be exactly what you're looking for from a height weight standpoint, but when you turn on the film, he just knows how to play football. Clatterbaugh is probably a Mike. I've seen him listed anywhere between 220 and 245, so it's hard to know exactly how big he is. I think he'll end up at Mike. Noah Chambers I love from DeMatha, natural inside linebacker, pretty good athlete, pretty good ball skills. Played with a big club on his hand for most of this past season, so he's got some toughness about him and knows how to play hurt. What I really like is the fact that Virginia Tech recruited 2 natural inside linebackers in this class. They've only recruited 1 natural inside linebacker since Brent Pryce gotten here, and that was Asen Stevens, who eventually outgrew the position and is now a defensive end. They've been so focused on recruiting outside linebackers, converting them, or even bringing in like a guy like Devorian Copeland, who was 178 pounds and never had a chance to play inside linebacker at that size. I'm not saying you can't convert outside linebackers and safeties to inside linebackers, because there are plenty of examples of that working. I'm just saying you can't bring every player you bring in can't be that type. You have to get some guys with natural ability inside the box, because if those conversions don't work out, then you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt, and we've seen some of that over the last couple of years. So I'm very happy to get 2 natural inside linebackers in the program. And the fact that where am I at? Noah Chambers is from DeMatha, which for me as a school Virginia Tech needs to continue to recruit heavily. That's like a double dose of positivity for me that he's an inside linebacker and plays for DeMatha.
Elijah Robinson.
I'd like to remind our listeners they can drink now because Chris has mentioned natural inside linebackers
And
several times.
all on the same podcast.
Yeah, so take a couple shots for that.
Well, what time is it? It's 11:06.
Yeah, whenever they're listening to this, it might be later.
Well,
it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Yeah. I thought Clatterbaugh was an interesting one because they talking to Alex Jones, the player personnel guy there, just said one of his first meetings after he was hired, he was sitting in Brent Pry's office, and he's like, "This guy just feels right. This feels like the best fit of anybody they've talked to so far. Like, just sort of like he felt like this was a great situation for him, and he committed pretty early. I mean, he was March last year, so one of the earlier ones in the class once the thing got going. So will be interesting to see if they found like a guy sort of like a cornerstone type of linebacker they could build that whole thing around."
How about the edge rushers once we move now to the defensive line?
I think Zeke Chinwike?
Yeah.
Chinwiki, I think.
Chinwiki, okay, that was it.
His dad looked like a character.
Oh, yeah, his dad had a really good time talking to
all the
Brent
coaches
Pry.
like, man, you had tough questions.
Yeah.
And he sounded like he was really taking it to the coaching staff on that stuff.
Two totally different type of defensive end prospects here, the other being Sherrod Henderson. Chinwiki is 6'6", 240, Henderson 6'3", 210. Chinwiki's one of those guys, if his frame fills out, may not stay at defensive end. But I think he's got the length and the athleticism to maybe even be an offensive tackle for Virginia Tech. He's kind of a project, but I think he's a good athletic project. Sherrod Henderson is a guy, for the third year in a row, he reminds me of 2 classes ago, Jason Abbey, and last year's class, Derek Dandy, a guy who looks pretty undersized. You can tell that they're excellent pass rushers. But those other 2 guys, Abbey and Dandy, both showed up bigger than projected. Like, Dandy's up over 240 now, and I remember watching his tape last year and thinking, man, that guy looks like he's 210 pounds. He's not going to be able to contribute he's a redshirt sophomore. Looks like he's going to be able to contribute this year, and we saw Jason Abbey get in there and contribute as a redshirt freshman. I think Sherrod Henderson's a very similar prospect to those two, a guy who's 6'3", 210 right now, but J.C. Price seems to be very good at evaluating guys of that similar frame, and they're able to – I think Henderson's enrolling this January. He's one of those guys who is enrolling. Get that early time in the weight room and then get a redshirt year. And, by the time he'll probably be in the 240 range by the time he actually sets foot on the football field for Virginia Tech on defense. So he's a similar signing to me as some past defensive ends that J.C. Price has signed. Yes, he is a good running back, good overall athlete.
Thanks, Nick. Last thing, just one interior defensive tackle here, Christian Evans.
Yeah, that's going to be a focus in the transfer portal again because we've seen 3 tackles hit the portal so far.
Yeah, I guess how you classify Finlater.
Yeah.
And Perry was kind of going between the two. But yeah, the defensive line has been hit hard by attrition in the portal so far. Not that I thought all those guys were going to step into huge roles, but it's just a position that you can't be caught shorthanded. There's not a lot of just like 6'3", 320-pound guys on campus. You can't pull them out of the student body and be like, go be a tackling dummy out there. So you need some guys.
I'm a big fan of the defensive tackle class that Tech signed last year. Emmett Laws, obviously Andrew Hanchuk, Gerard Johnson from Virginia Beach. They're all defensive tackles, but you can't necessarily expect all 3 of them as redshirt freshmen to get in there and fill out your 2 deep. 1 or 2 of them possibly. I know the Tech's offensive coaches really want Hanchuk as an offensive lineman. And J.C. Price really wants him as a defensive tackle. He reminds Price of Chad Beasley, who was a defensive tackle here late 90s, early 2000s. Chad was an outstanding defensive tackle at Virginia Tech, but he also went on to play offensive line for the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL. He's one of those rare guys that gets converted after he gets to the NFL. Wow. So if Hanchuk is a similar type of player as Chad Beasley, I could see him being a great defensive tackle for Tech, but I could also see him being a great offensive lineman for Virginia Tech. You need both right now. Virginia Tech needs both. I wish there were 2 of them, but unfortunately there's not. Christian Evans, I think, is a good prospect, good fit for Virginia Tech's scheme, very good fit for Virginia Tech's scheme. But again, true freshman. I would anticipate Virginia Tech signing a couple of defensive tackles in this portal period.
Well, that kind of brings us into this next part of the conversation here as we wrap things up. Wanted to ask, what are the must-gets out of the portal right now?
We don't quite know. Defensive tackles, I think, obviously.
Running back?
One of them. Yeah, I think they'll try to sign a defensive end.
Okay.
They'll probably try to sign one wide receiver, maybe two, depending on who they think they can get. I would love to see them sign a safety. Please, please, please get me one or two natural inside linebackers from the transfer portal. Josiah Trotter just entered the portal from West Virginia. He was, I think, the first recruit to visit Virginia Tech with his dad, Jeremiah, when Brent Pry was hired. And I don't know exactly why he ended up at West Virginia. One thing I heard is that he didn't maybe quite fit the athletic profile for an inside linebacker for Pry, which to me, I don't care. 5'11" guys who can stop the run are perfect Mike linebackers. Anyway, so he goes to West Virginia. Basically had a freshman All-American caliber season this past season. One of the top 15 linebackers in the country, I think, in run stopping grade. Just 92 tackles as a redshirt freshman. And I think he's a guy that I would be going after if I was Brent Pry in the portal. So and let's see what else. Any other?
You think
needs?
I think they prioritize corner over safety.
They
now.
could.
If you're losing Strong,
Yeah.
and maybe Mansour,
Yes.
and then you have the other piece of it with Jalen Stroman could come back next year if he wants to. And you had Stroman to Mose and Quentin Reddish. I think that's a solid foundation in the safety group. And some guys coming up the ranks I think they like as well. The corner, I think you look at the guys that you lose at receiver and corner, it's just there's a lot of young guys that they're excited about, but sometimes you need a veteran in that room. And I think running back could be the same situation, but I don't know how Malachi goes there. So just some guys that have been through battles, you'd like to find them, and that's typically what you can find in the transfer portal.
Right. And, I think Dante Lovett's definite starter, but I don't think there's another definite starter at corner. So yeah, you're right. You have to go find one of those, and we'll see what happens at quarterback. Ideally, Pop Watson and Kyron Drones are here next year. But these days, that doesn't happen a whole lot in college football, where it seems like a decision has to be made, and it gets made somehow. But you don't have both options the next year. So I don't know what's going to happen there. If Kyron Drones is on the team next year, do they want to try to find another College Lee in the portal, or do you go roll with Davi? I think if Drones were to happen to leave and Pop Watson were here, you bring in somebody to compete with him for the starting job. Otherwise, it's Pop Watson as a redshirt sophomore, backed up by Davi Belfour with two true freshmen behind him.
All your backs have not taken a snap in a game.
Exactly.
So you don't want to go in like that.
Ideally, both those guys come back, and you don't have to take a transfer quarterback this year. But that'll get worked out one way or the other.
Yeah, we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out eventually. Last but not least, wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this staff's ability to develop through 3 years. That seems to be one of their strengths in a way.
Depends on the position.
Sure.
I would not so sure I would agree with at certain positions. I think offensive line, I think Xavier Chaplin developed some this past year. I think Braylon Moore took a step forward. Maybe not as much Johnny Garrett as I would have hoped. Brody Meadows seemed like kind of the same player he was as a redshirt freshman. Linebacker development, I'm not overly thrilled with. I think Derek Jones has done great at cornerback. So it kind of depends on the position. And I do think Virginia Tech needs to be better, more consistent across the board at player development. Certainly at specific positions like offensive line, where, like we've said, like you could blow a whole lot of your transfer budget on just mediocre offensive linemen from the portal because nobody has enough offensive linemen. So that's why it's very important that you be able to evaluate and develop guys within. So that's a spot where I think Virginia Tech needs to take a step forward.
Andy, what do you think on player development?
It's always tough to tell. Like, what's talent acquisition and what's development? Like, they did a good job bringing in APR and Aeneas Peoples. They were also pretty talented. That said, APR wasn't getting 16 sacks a year at Florida. Aeneas Peoples wasn't a first-team All-ACC pick at Duke. They were with Virginia Tech. So, I think they've done a good job in certain spots, like Chris mentioned, and there are other spots that leaves a bit to be desired. But that's what the case is when you're 6-6. I mean, look at the overall track of the team. There's some good, there's some bad, and they're right there in the middle at 6-6. But I have to say, where they are roster wise and how they develop players this year compared to a couple years ago when they were 3-8, and last year's pro day where no pro team showed up, basically. I mean, there's just no reason to. This year, there's going to be a real big reason to show up. So they've upgraded the talent on the roster, and certainly I think there's been development along the way there.
Yeah, remember that practice in the preseason where it's like, who are all these people at practice? Oh, they're NFL scouts.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
It was not the case last year.
Yeah, there we go. Well, Virginia Tech has had 3 players hop in the portal. Keep an eye out for all of that. Keep an eye out for guys from other teams hopping in the portal, and of course the rumor buzzes will start before we know it. What's coming up this week on Tech Sideline editorial wise before we let everybody go? I know David's very busy with basketball. Carter was filling in on the men's side last night. What about on the football side of things?
Today, on Thursday, I will have a transfer portal article. It'll be probably not too long, but I'll go over each position and what I think Tech might do. Not necessarily who they're going to target, because we don't know a full list of guys in the portal at this point, considering it hasn't even technically opened yet. But identify the positions that have needs, of course, and then tomorrow, regular Friday Q&A from me.
Yeah, I got some more recruiting stuff leftovers. Signing day leftovers are kind of like Thanksgiving leftovers. Like, you have to get them out right away. Yeah. Like 3 days from now, nobody's going to read that stuff. So that'll be out quickly. Whit Babcock is putting a thing out Friday, talking with Bill Roth. Friendly media, to say the least. Works for the school, so it's not like he's going to get grilled about stuff, but maybe some insight into this NIL and the house settlement and all that stuff. I'll be interested to hear what he has to say on that whole thing, and we'll probably write up a story based on that. And then bowl selections coming up on Sunday. We haven't talked about bowl selection.
Bowls. It's like 4 things going on this month.
It's college football, the stupidest setup. Like, let's do our off season in the middle of the season. No, the bowl selection's coming up Sunday, and still, some to play out there. How many playoff teams is the ACC going to get? 1 or 2? If Clemson wins, have a shot at 2 with SMU maybe not falling out, and if SMU wins, it's going to be 1 based on how the committee has set that whole thing up, and that affects everybody farther down the totem pole in terms of bowl selection. So you're looking at Virginia Tech. Maybe most likely spot is like Fenway Bowl, Gasparilla Bowl, somewhere in that range. But I think if 2 get in the playoff, they could jump into that tier that has the Sun Bowl, Duke's Mayo, and Pinstripe. And, of those 3, Duke's Mayo would make a lot of sense. So I think Charlotte or Boston, probably the best guesses at where they might go. And I probably lean towards Boston based on how things have trended with the ACC in the playoff and the kind of respect they get there. But we'll find out on Sunday exactly for sure.
Well, if they go to Boston, maybe we'll get another game over from Andy.
Maybe.
And maybe some clam chowder.
Depending on the opt-outs, the game might be over before it starts there. We'll see.
Yeah, very true, very true. Nick, what's coming up not editorial, video content-wise?
Not much. We'll probably do some videos next week. Of course, when the bowl game gets announced, we'll do that. No basketball content for a while.
The people are thankful for that.
Yeah.
Oh boy,
I'm thankful for that.
I pitched today. I actually pitched an idea to talk about the ACC SEC debacle, and David responded with, "Not sure how many people are going to want to watch that." So we're not going to do that. But we'll have just regular stuff, and we'll have a podcast probably next week, and we'll have a special guest, right, Gio?
We'll have a special guest next week. Yes. Mac McCarthy's going to be coming.
That's right. Mac, that'll be great.
We'll have Mac.
Got a lot of great questions for Mac.
Yes, so that is going to be good.
And he's a hoot and holler, so that'll be a lot of fun with him.
He's fantastic.
Right before Christmas, and then we'll kick into full off-season mode, and that's where Brent Pry really gets those the Twitter followers and everybody riled up and ready to go for next season.
Maybe we can improve our off-season record from like 9-3 to 10-2 this year.
Oh no, they were pretty good this year. It was pretty good this year.
Yeah, there we go. All right, well, I think that wraps things up for today. Thank you to our presenting sponsor today, First Bank and Trust Company. For Chris Coleman, for Andy Bitter, for Nick Brown, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week.